All right, I'm very pleased to be joined by one of my former colleagues who just got back from Australia amid the COVID-19 virus, Mikaela Henschel, former primetime local news anchor and weather anchor as well. Mikaela, it's good to see you once again.
Yeah, it's definitely good to be back here on broadcasting with Lloyd. I've missed everyone in the community there, so hope everyone's staying safe. Obviously, these are crazy times.
Absolutely. And of course, for those that don't know, Mikaela, you were in Australia for the last couple of months. Of course, you did have to cut your trip short. Talk about the experience leading up to COVID. I know it wasn't, a couple of weeks ago, we didn't take it as seriously. And now, of course, it's much more serious. So talk about the mood leading up to your departure.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've been back in Canada less than a week. I've made the decision to come back to Canada just a week ago. And, within those 7 days, everything in Australia has changed. Just with what's going on with that country within the States, as well as for travelers. So I made the decision based off of Prime Minister Trudeau's recommendations for Canadian travelers abroad to return home. I had been abroad for 7 months. I planned to continue to do so until about December. So I cut my trip quite a bit short, but as soon as that went out, I did make the choice to come home. But at that time in Australia, it was pretty much business as usual. I did lose my job last week due to the virus, which did aid in my thought process of coming home with no income there. But other than that, that was really one of the first businesses to shut their doors. And speaking to other travelers, I was staying in a hostel, so I'm surrounded by people from around the globe. And at that time they were kind of saying, "Oh, are you really going?" It was a little bit shocking for them. But by the time I landed, and even today, almost 95% of those people who told me just a week ago that they were absolutely not going home are going home. I think their fears are that they're going back home to Germany and the UK, where they obviously have way more cases than we do here in Canada. So I understand their fear of going home, but I am glad I made it home when I did, because, back in Australia, the state borders are closing, and that's just within a week of returning back to Canadian soil. So everything has completely changed just from being home 4 days, and everything back there has completely changed as well.
Now, you mentioned you were living in a backpacker kind of environment, like a hostel. What were some of the responses from your other, other fellow backpackers there from other countries? Because I know it's pretty broad spectrum there from people that are there. So, any other Canadians or any other Americans that were there that had to go through similar processes?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I spoke to an American who was traveling home just the day before me, and at that point, he did need to self-isolate when returning back to the U.S. And, to me, that was concerning, because the U.S. Currently has one of the highest numbers, and Canada at the time was seeing a lot of numbers of COVID-19 coming from travel from the U.S. So that was a big concern for me. It's really interesting to see how other countries were responding to this pandemic. A lot of my fellow British travelers and travelers from the UK were advised, if you are financially stable, stay put, because the situation in the UK is so much worse than the numbers we're seeing even here in Canada versus Australia. Their numbers are way higher than that, even in Germany, which has a high percentage of backpackers in Australia as well. So it was definitely interesting to see. Speaking to a fellow Canadian, on the day that I decided to leave, she was absolutely not going home. By the time I landed, she had already booked a flight, but she paid over $1,000 more than I did and wasn't able to find a flight home for 5 days. So, it's happening so quick, and it was definitely interesting to see, what other countries were saying. But at this point, I have to say about 95% of, my friends and people I met traveling have decided to return home by this point.
Now, when you came back to Canada, what was the first thing that the Canadian government told you, or what is one, aside from self-isolating, what else have they kind of asked you about when you came home?
Yeah, you know what? They didn't really ask you too much. The travel day was, to get a flight, you were just kind of getting with what you could find at that moment. So I had to go in and out of 3 countries within 24 hours to make my journey home. I went through Australia, the United States, as well as Canada. And I have to say, it wasn't until I reached home soil here in Canada that, it really hit me because business was as usual pretty much in Australia. You know, a few things were closed, but less staff, but there was really long lines and clusters of people. And I know we've been seeing that at airports around the world as people are trying to flee back to their countries through this pandemic. So that was a little concerning. They didn't ask me any screening measures there. In the United States, it was a little bit more. I flew through LAX, which is typically a very busy airport. And, you know, so to see it not as busy was a little strange. But I have to say, there were still big groups of people. They had asked if I had any symptoms. But when I reached Canada, and I flew in via Vancouver at first, and that's when, as soon as you got off the plane, there was officers saying, do you have any symptoms? You know, they were handing you forms saying, here's the symptoms for COVID. Here are all the numbers across the entire country. If you were to see any symptoms minor, if they were even minor, who to call and what to do. So there was stations and pop-up kiosks with designated staff saying, if you have any comments or questions or anything, go to those areas. So they had posters everywhere, even in the washrooms, tell you how to wash your hands properly. So I think Canada, as a traveler, really stepped up to the plate, and, you know, you made it apparent for everyone on what to do. You know, they encouraged social distancing, which is not something I saw until I reached Canada.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad you're safe, and it's
Thank
always
you.
good to chat with you. But thanks a lot, Mikaela, for taking time to chat with us today. Really appreciate it, as always. And of course, welcome home.
Thanks so much, Connor. And everyone stay safe, and it's good to chat with you.